The Browning 1911. A Century of Craft, Combat, and Culture. Chapter 1. The Pistol That Refused to Die. John Moses Browning was born on January 23, 1855, in Ogden, Utah, the son of a Mormon gunsmith. From his earliest years, he displayed a mechanical genius that few could rival. By his teenage years, he was already experimenting with firearms in his father's workshop, redesigning triggers, barrels, and cartridges with a precision that amazed local craftsmen. Unlike many inventors, Browning did not rely on formal education. He relied on observation, intuition, and tireless experimentation. He could envision the movement of springs, the timing of firing pins, and the alignment of cartridges in his mind before touching a single piece of metal. He had a gift. Over his lifetime, Browning would hold more than 120 patents, fundamentally transforming rifles, shotguns, and pistols. Yet among all his creations, one would endure longer and more universally than any other: the Colt model of 1911. Browning's philosophy was simple yet profound. A weapon's value lay not in complexity, but in reliability, balance, and harmony with the human hand. The 1911 combined the raw stopping power of the .45 ACP cartridge, which Browning himself designed, with a semi-automatic mechanism that could feed, fire, and eject flawlessly under almost any condition. Browning designed it to survive mud, rain, sand, snow, blood, and human error, yet still perform perfectly when lives depended on it. Even after his death in 1926, the 1911 would continue to prove his genius on battlefields, in law enforcement, in competitive shooting, and in civilian hands around the world, and it's still going strong today. At the turn of the 20th century, the U.S. Army recognized that its standard-issue revolvers were becoming outdated. Soldiers required a sidearm with greater stopping power, faster reload capability, and improved reliability under battlefield conditions. In response, the Army conducted exhaustive trials to identify a new military pistol. These tests were rigorous and multifaceted. Weapons were fired repeatedly in controlled and extreme conditions, subjected to mud, sand, water, temperature extremes, and repeatedly dropped to simulate rough handling. Evaluators assessed not only mechanical reliability but also ergonomics, ease of maintenance, trigger consistency, accuracy, and the ability of untrained soldiers to operate the pistol under severe stress. The trials were a crucible for both engineering and human factors, designed to determine which design could survive the unpredictable chaos of combat. Among the many entries, John Browning's M1911 stood out. Chambered in the muscular .45 ACP cartridge, the pistol combined serious stopping power with exceptional reliability. Soldiers handling the 1911 for the first time were often struck by its intuitive feel. The grip angle naturally guided the hand, the single-action trigger broke crisp and clean, and the pistol cycled smoothly round after round. During mud and water tests, competitors such as the Savage 1907 and Luger variants jammed repeatedly, while the 1911 continued to operate flawlessly. Officers noted that even inexperienced shooters could achieve consistent control and accuracy, a psychological and practical advantage that proved decisive. The Army Board's evaluation made it clear: the 1911 was not only mechanically superior but instinctively usable, a critical factor in real-world combat. At the dawn of the 20th century, the U.S. Army found itself in an awkward transition period. The .38 caliber revolvers adopted in the 1890s had proven anemic during the Philippine-American War, where reports from the field described determined, narcotized and religiously fanatical Moro fighters absorbing multiple hits without being stopped. By 1900, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department concluded that a new military sidearm was desperately needed, one with much greater stopping power, faster reloading, and superior performance in the mud, heat, and chaos of horse-mounted warfare. John Moses Browning, already famous for his lever-action rifles and early self-loading pistols, began submitting a series of experimental semi-automatic designs to Colt. These early pistols bore only a passing resemblance to what would become the 1911. They used smaller calibers, different locking systems, and safeties that were still being refined. As Browning refined his work through a sequence of test pistols, the models of 1900, 1902, 1905, and 1907, the cavalry became the loudest voice in the room. Mounted soldiers needed a pistol that could be drawn and fired with one hand while controlling a horse, a single-handed weapon that would not snag on equipment, and that could be safely carried with a round chambered. Cavalry officers also demanded a positive manual safety so the pistol could ride cocked and locked in a flap holster without fear of an accidental discharge that might kill the horse or the soldier himself. Their feedback reshaped the design in profound ways. The grip safety was retained to prevent firing if the pistol was not held correctly, a frame-mounted thumb safety was added so a rider could carry the gun ready for immediate use, and the trigger was refined to provide a short, crisp break rather than the heavy double-action pulls common to revolvers. By 1909 and 1910 the pistol had begun to look unmistakably like the classic 1911. The Army demanded endurance trials that bordered on brutality. Pistols were fired thousands of times without cleaning, dunked in water, rolled in dust and sand, and subjected to rapid-fire tests meant to simulate battlefield abuse. Browning's lock breech system with a swinging barrel link proved both strong and forgiving, and the new .45 ACP cartridge, developed specifically to meet cavalry demands for man-stopping power, performed exactly as the Army had hoped. In 1911 the final pattern was approved, not as a triumph of laboratory theory, but as the product of 10 years of hard lessons from mounted troops, tropical campaigns, and relentless testing. The Colt model of 1911 emerged as the answer to cavalrymen who needed a pistol that could be trusted with one hand on the reins and their lives on the line. When the U.S. Army officially adopted the Colt in March 1911, it astonished soldiers accustomed to revolvers. Most recruits had never handled a semi-automatic pistol, and they watched in awe as the slide cycled faster than the eye could see, ejecting spent shells and chambering fresh rounds, automatically ready to fire over and over again, as if by some sort of mechanized magic. The 1911 fit naturally in the hand, its grip guiding aim almost instinctively, while the crisp, precise trigger offered a break unlike any other firearm of the era. Many soldiers described it as feeling alive, almost an extension of their own reflexes, capable of responding instantly in moments of crisis. World War I provided the pistol's first true test. Private William Harrison, a young infantryman in France, carried his Colt through the rain-soaked, mud-filled trenches of the European Western Front. One morning the pistol slipped from his hands into a flooded trench. Hours later, shaking with cold and hunger, he retrieved it. Mud had caked into the barrel and slide, yet when he chambered the first round, it fired cleanly. That same single-action pistol saved his life later that day when a German patrol crept in a bit too close. Harrison would always say he trusted that Colt pistol more than any rifle or comrade. Between the wars, the Colt 1911 became a fixture in law enforcement as well as civilian culture. Federal agents such as Melvin Purvis and Elliot Ness carried 1911s while confronting notorious criminals during the Prohibition era. Tales circulated of shootouts in Chicago where the pistol's stopping power and smooth operation turned life-or-death situations in favor of those who knew it best. Police departments across the nation adopted it, while civilians found it equally valuable for self-defense and competitive shooting. Bullseye shooters discovered that its balance and trigger made it ideal for precision work, and speed shooters like Jerry Mikulek later demonstrated the 1911's unmatched capacity for rapid, accurate fire. Gunsmiths such as Ed Brown, Bill Wilson, and Kimber upgraded and transformed Colts into works of art by hand-fitting barrels, polishing slides, and tuning triggers to create instruments as precise and beautiful as they were lethal. World War II saw the 1911 enter legend status. In the humid jungles of Guadalcanal, Corporal Samuel Tucker moved quietly through undergrowth, Colt 1911 strapped to his side. When ambushed by Japanese soldiers, he relied on his pistol to buy critical seconds for his squad to regroup. On Iwo Jima, Sergeant Thomas M. Bowen faced a sudden onslaught. He fired his Colt rapidly, each shot precise, giving his unit enough time to establish defensive positions. Audie Murphy, not only a famous Hollywood actor but the most decorated soldier in American history, carried his 1911 through countless firefights in Europe. He later recounted that, amidst explosions, machine gun fire, and utter chaos, his 1911 Manstopper felt as natural as his own arm, reliable and responsive when split-second decisions meant life or death. The Korean War introduced brutal cold that tested both man and machine. Private First Class Leonard "Red" Clayton huddled in a foxhole, Colt pistol at the ready, fingers numb from frostbite. Other weapons froze and jammed, but his 1911 continued to fire reliably, earning Clayton's undying devotion. In Vietnam, Special Forces operators depended on the sidearm in dense jungle patrols and clandestine missions. Sergeant Major Raymond Ed. Anderson recounted near-fatal encounters where his Colt functioned without fail, allowing him to escape ambushes and protect his team. Even famed astronaut John Glenn, years before orbiting the Earth, carried a 1911 as a Marine aviator and praised its reliability during survival training exercises where seconds counted. In civilian hands, the 1911 was equally transformative. Competitive shooters refined techniques to exploit its outstanding balance and glassy trigger. Ken Ballou dominated national bullseye championships, while Jerry Mikulek demonstrated the pistol's potential in rapid-fire competition, astonishing audiences with speed and accuracy. Law-abiding citizens also carried it for personal defense, trusting the same weapon that had saved countless lives in war and law enforcement confrontations. The 1911's cultural influence extended to Hollywood, where directors used it to symbolize authority, precision, and calm decisiveness. From film noir detectives to modern action heroes, the 1911 represented skill, courage, and reliability. Its presence on screen mirrored its reputation in reality, blending utility with legend. Such refinements accommodate competition, law enforcement, tactical, and civilian defensive needs while preserving the legendary single-action trigger, reliability, and stopping power that define Browning's original vision. The 1911 remains a living testament to the principle that truly great design endures and evolves, never losing sight of the practical realities for which it was first created. To hold a Colt 1911 today is to hold history itself. It carries the genius of John Moses Browning, the courage of Audie Murphy and Thomas Bowen, the skill of federal agents and competitive shooters, and the devotion of generations of gunsmiths. It refuses to die, enduring in steel, spring, culture, aesthetic beauty, and memory, a living legacy that continues to serve, inspire, and endure. Each time it is holstered, drawn, aimed, and fired, the story of 115 American years unfolds, a testament to genius, craftsmanship, precision, and the timeless bond between human and machine. Chapter 2: From Revolvers to Autoloaders, Why the Army Needed a New Pistol. Let's dig a little deeper. At the dawn of the 20th century, the world was teetering between tradition and innovation. Steam engines gave way to electricity, horse-drawn carriages to automobiles, and black powder to smokeless cartridges. Militaries faced new demands: faster engagements, longer ranges, and more powerful firearms. In this world of rapid change, John Moses Browning stood at his workbench in Ogden, Utah, a quiet genius with a hammer, files, and metal plates, shaping ideas that would outlast empires. Browning accepted the challenge and approached it as he always had, methodically. He understood that recoil management, ergonomics, and mechanical timing were critical. The .45 ACP cartridge, developed in tandem with the pistol itself, offered stopping power unmatched by the much smaller and weaker European 9mm designs. Browning meticulously balanced the slide weight, recoil, and hammer spring, and barrel locking mechanism to absorb the force without sacrificing reliability. Every detail mattered. He experimented with prototypes for years, adjusting angles, spring tensions, barrel locking systems, trigger mechanisms, and feeding ramps, often working late into the night alongside his brothers by lantern light, the smell of oiled steel filling the workshop. The genius of the 1911 lay not only in its firepower but in its harmony with the shooter. Browning carefully calculated the grip angle, understanding that it should naturally align the wrist, hand, and eye toward the target. He designed a short, crisp trigger break, unlike the long, heavy pull of revolvers, so that even a novice could place a shot accurately. The pistol's single-action mechanism and combined grip and thumb safety offered both security and speed. Every component was designed to work together seamlessly, so that even under the most adverse conditions, the 1911 could perform without hesitation. The first Army contracts were awarded in 1911, and soon, soldiers began receiving their sidearms. Even during initial trials, the Colt impressed. Officers marveled at the pistol's capabilities. Enlisted men quickly adapted, noting how the gun seemed to respond instinctively to the user's movements. The good word spread quickly. Browning's pistol, however, was not born in a vacuum. It represented a culmination of his lifetime's work, a synthesis of previous designs, and an answer to the changing needs of modern warfare. European militaries still clung to revolvers and small-caliber sidearms, often failing in trials when subjected to rigorous testing. Browning understood that reliability under stress would distinguish his design. He tested it in desert heat, icy cold rain, and thick earthen sludge, pushing prototypes to extremes. The result was a weapon like no other. Even during peacetime, the 1911 drew attention. Competitive shooters began experimenting with Colt prototypes, discovering its balance and trigger made rapid-fire accuracy possible in ways previously unimagined. In the 1930s, during the Prohibition era, law enforcement officers tested the pistol against gangsters and criminals like Al Capone and John Dillinger, finding it equally effective in street-level encounters. Meanwhile, gunsmiths marveled at Browning's design, experimenting with custom grips, polished slides, more accurate sights, alloy metals and tuned triggers, turning the pistol into both a precision tool and a work of art. From this foundation, the 1911 would go on to serve in every major military conflict of the 20th century, in nearly all avenues of law enforcement, in civilian life, and in the competitive arenas of marksmanship. Its stoic creator, Browning himself, remained modest about his creation. He never sought fame for the 1911. He sought only functionality, reliability, and a design that respected the operator. Yet the pistol's success was undeniable. It was adopted, adapted, and celebrated across the military, law enforcement, and civilian spheres. However, its longevity, already apparent, was only just beginning. Chapter 3, Forged in Steel and Doctrine, How the 1911 Became America's Pistol. At the dawn of the 20th century, the United States Army found itself at a technological crossroads. Black powder and revolvers, stalwarts of the frontier, were giving way to smokeless powder and repeating pistols born of European ingenuity. Yet the nation's recent experiences in the Philippines had exposed a fatal weakness in its sidearms. The .38 long Colt revolvers then in service had repeatedly failed to stop determined Moro fighters, men who advanced through grievous wounds with bolos raised, seemingly immune to pain. Soldiers began telling stories, some whispered, some shouted, about emptying cylinders into attackers who simply would not fall. In desperation, the Army pulled aging .45 Colt single-action revolvers out of storage and reissued them. Those old frontier guns, crude and heavy though they were, restored confidence overnight. The message to the Ordnance Department was unmistakable. America needed a powerful automatic pistol in .45 caliber. John Moses Browning was already a legend when the Army came calling. His designs had reshaped Winchester and Colt alike, but his first automatic pistols were evolutionary, not revolutionary. The Colt Model 1900, Browning's first serious military offering, was sleek and modern, chambered in .38 automatic. Its most peculiar feature was a rear sight safety, a flat steel plate that doubled as both rear sight and manual safety. Flip it down and the pistol could fire. Flip it up and the firing mechanism was blocked. It was clever but fragile, awkward and confusing. The only thing keeping the slide locked to the frame was a small and removable metal block at the front of the pistol. Lose or break that tiny piece and the gun is useless. Soldiers disliked it. Dirt could disable it. Under stress, it was too easy to misjudge its position. The Model 1902 that followed slightly refined the concept. The consumer sporting model did away with the sight safety and adopted a more conventional slide and frame and opted for an inertial firing pin as the only safety. It was longer, heavier, and more durable, but still chambered in the anemic .38 ACP. It was an improvement, not a solution. The 1903 pocket hammer and later the 1905 military model moved Browning closer to his goal. The 1905 finally introduced the .45 ACP cartridge, a husky, slow-moving bullet that delivered crushing momentum. But the pistol itself was muzzle-heavy and unwieldy. It had no grip safety. The slide ran over the top of the barrel rather than around it. It was prone to failures. Every test brought another list of demands from Army evaluators. Between 1906 and 1910, Browning endured an almost cruel cycle of trials. Each submission was punished, disassembled, criticized, and returned with extensive notes for changes. He responded not with resentment but with steel. By 1907 he had introduced a grip safety, an automatic device that prevented firing unless the pistol was held properly. The slide now wrapped the barrel in a far stronger configuration. The link system that tilted the barrel during recoil was refined. The glorious thumb safety appeared, allowing the pistol to be carried cocked and locked, ready in an instant but safe on the march. Then came the legendary 1910 torture test. 6,000 rounds were fired through a single Browning automatic pistol. It was dunked in water, rolled in sand and packed with mud. The only stoppages were caused by deliberately defective cartridges. When the smoke cleared, the Army finally had its answer. On March 29, 1911, the pistol was formally adopted as the United States pistol, caliber .45, model of 1911. The original 1911 was not a gentleman's pistol. Its finish was utilitarian blue. The sights were tiny half-moons. The trigger was long. The long hammer spur would bite the web of a shooter's hand if his grip was careless. But it worked. 7 rounds of .45 hardball ammo fed from a single-stack magazine into a pistol that balanced recoil, reliability, and accuracy in a way no handgun had before. It could easily be stripped in the field for quick cleaning. It could be trusted in trenches, jungles, and deserts. When American doughboys carried it into the trenches, the 1911 became something more than a tool. It became a psychological weapon. German troops reportedly referred to it as the hand cannon. It was said, tongue-in-cheek, shoot a man in the hand with a 1911 and dissipate his soul. However, after World War I, soldiers spoke honestly about the pistol's remaining shortcomings. The long trigger was uncomfortable for smaller hands and sometimes difficult to reach. The short tang caused a painful hammer bite. The flat mainspring housing allowed for shooters to sometimes grip the pistol too low and shoot off target. So, improvements were made, and in 1924, the new model 1911A1 was standardized. The trigger was shortened. The frame behind the trigger was scalloped for easier access. The hammer spur was shortened so as not to draw blood. The grip safety was lengthened. Iron sights slightly altered. An arched and serrated mainspring housing offered better grip and subtly altered the pistol's natural point of aim by forcing the shooter's hand higher up on into the pistol's arched. Checkered plastic stocks were added in place of the walnut double diamond stocks found on the original 1911s, and it sported a dull, non-reflective, parkerized finish so as not to tip the enemy off to one's location. These were subtle changes, but combined they made the pistol safer and it felt even better in the hand. The 1911 A1 marched across Europe once again in World War II, rode ashore in the Pacific and served through Korea and Vietnam. It was carried by generals and medics, paratroopers and tunnel rats. It lived in tanker holsters and shoulder rigs, in ankle holsters and muddy pockets, and quite often slipped into one's pants at the lower arch of the back to prevent damage or loss when bellying under barbed wire or through snow and sludge. By the 1950s, the 1911 had become inseparable from the American hero. It gleamed in the hands of citizens, soldiers, detectives, FBI agents, cowboys of the modern age, and weary veterans haunted by war. It was not merely a gun, it was shorthand for resolve. As polymer pistols flooded the market in the 1980s, the 1911 refused to fade into the history books. Instead, it evolved into something even more personal. Colt's National Match pistols became the standard for competition. Springfield Armory resurrected the platform with forged frames and slides, honoring tradition while improving metallurgy. Kimber brought the 1911 into gun shops everywhere with tight tolerances, match barrels, crisp 3.5-pound trigger weights. And then came the Craftsman. King's Gun Works, Wilson Combat, Ed Brown, Les Baer, Nighthawk. Each turned Browning's military service pistol into mechanical art for competition. Hand-lapped slides. Hand-checkered walnut grips. Perfectly tuned extractors. Triggers breaking like icicles, extended safeties, extended magazine release buttons, larger and adjustable sights, shock buffers, compensators, flared and melted magazine wells, two-tone finishes and so much more. A century after its birth, the 1911 was no longer just America's pistol. It was America's heirloom. Chapter 4. Development of the original model, from prototype to Army issue. Chapter 4. Fire and Steel, the 1911 and World War II. World War II was a war of extremes. It spanned oceans, jungles, deserts, and cities, testing every weapon in the arsenals of the world. For the American soldier, the Colt 1911 was more than a sidearm. It was a trusted companion, a reliable instrument of survival amidst the chaos of modern mechanized warfare. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, the pistol proved its mettle repeatedly, forging a legacy that would endure far beyond the end of the war. In the humid jungles of Guadalcanal, Corporal Samuel Tucker moved cautiously through dense undergrowth, the distant crack of rifles and mortar fire echoing through the trees. Suddenly, enemy forces emerged from concealed positions, ambushing his squad. Tucker drew his non-reflective, parkerized Colt pistol, the weight and balance of familiar comfort in his hand. He fired round after round, each shot precise, buying time for his unit to regroup. Later, he would write in his diary, "That pistol saved more than my life, it saved my friends." On the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, Sergeant Thomas M. Bowen faced a nightmarish assault. Japanese soldiers stormed fortified positions, their machine guns cutting swaths through advancing Marines. Bowen's 1911, meticulously maintained even in the heat and grit of battle, cycled flawlessly, allowing him to hold his sector long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Bowen later recalled that the pistol felt like an extension of his own hand, its reliability giving him the courage to stand against overwhelming odds. Medal of Honor recipients like Staff Sergeant Alvin C. York's contemporaries, though not all wielding 1911s, faced similar conditions where the reliability of their sidearm meant the difference between survival and catastrophe. Countless unnamed soldiers, often in letters home, recounted small but vital moments. A Colt fired to cover a retreat, to silence a sniper, or to secure a critical position. In each instance, the pistol's dependability became as much a matter of morale as firepower. Even amid the technological revolution of war, with tanks, planes, and heavy artillery dominating battlefields, the human element remained central. Unlike revolvers, which required deliberate cocking or risked misfires, The cocked and locked 1911 offered an immediate, reliable response to the enemy. The wartime factory workers who produced these pistols were themselves under immense pressure. Colt's Hartford, Connecticut plant, along with other subcontractors, churned out thousands of pistols per month. Skilled machinists hand-fitted slides, barrels, and frames, ensuring tolerances tight enough to guarantee function in the field. Workers often recounted that their job felt more than industrial. It was personal, it was a life-saving mission for their boys. Every single pistol represented a life on the line, a mother's child, a soldier somewhere who would depend on it in the crucible of combat. Beyond the battlefield, the 1911 shaped military culture. Officers instructed recruits not just on marksmanship, but on respect and care for the weapon. Soldiers cleaned and maintained their pistols obsessively, knowing that a jam or misfire could prove to be their last mistake. Letters and diaries frequently referenced the meticulous care of the Colt, and stories of soldiers risking exposure to rescue a fallen pistol illustrate the bond that formed between man and machine. After the war, veterans carried their Colts home, sharing stories of reliability in combat, and competitive shooters, recognizing the 1911's superior design, began to refine their shooting techniques around it. Gunsmiths and manufacturers, inspired by wartime lessons, continued to hand-fit and improve models, ensuring the legendary American pistol would remain relevant in peacetime as well as conflict. To hold a 1911 in your hand today is to hold legend. From Normandy's hedgerows to the volcanic cliffs of Iwo Jima, the Browning 1911 was present wherever American soldiers faced life-and-death challenges. Its combination of stopping power, precision, and reliability earned it a reputation unmatched by any other sidearm in American history. It was not merely a tool, it was a symbol of trust, courage, and ingenuity, a physical manifestation of life. Vietnam was a war defined by hellish heat, stifling humidity, and jungles so dense it seemed alive with strangling perils. The 1911 traveled with our boys on long patrols, packed in gear that was often soaked with sweat, mud, and rain. Encountering sudden ambushes along narrow trails, soldiers relied on the pistol to protect themselves and their teams, often buying crucial seconds for life-saving maneuvering. Special Forces operators in Vietnam developed a particular appreciation for the sidearm. Working behind enemy lines, often with limited support and under extreme stress, they depended on the pistol to function reliably in close quarters. A silent approach could become deadly in an instant, and a single misfire could compromise an entire mission. The 1911's adaptability became evident during urban operations as well. In towns and villages, where guerrilla fighters used narrow streets and hidden alleys, soldiers appreciated the pistol's ability to cycle quickly and accurately. Unlike bulkier rifles or jam-prone revolvers, the 1911 with its .45 ACP cartridge ensured that each round had power sufficient to instantly flip the enemy's off switch in close quarters. Even in training, soldiers learned to trust the 1911 implicitly. Units stationed in Korea and Vietnam often emphasized maintenance drills, teaching young men to clean, lubricate, and inspect every component, sometimes blindfolded. These rituals, tedious though they seemed, ensured that the pistol would perform under the harshest conditions. Veterans often recalled that handling the 1911 became almost second nature. Soldiers could instinctively cycle the slide, aim, and fire, confident that the weapon would respond exactly as intended. The Korean and Vietnam experiences further cemented the 1911's reputation for resilience. Unlike many contemporary designs, which faltered in adverse conditions and have since faded into oblivion, Browning's Manstopper continued to perform. At first glance, the Colt 1911 looks simple enough. A slab of steel, a grip, a trigger, a hammer, a slide. Yet hidden inside that deceptively straightforward shape is a perfectly timed mechanical dance, a kind of pocket-sized factory that awakens every time the trigger is pressed. To understand the 1911 is to understand that nothing in it exists alone. Each part depends on every other, like musicians in an orchestra who must play their notes at precisely the right moment. Everything begins with the grip frame, the skeleton of the pistol. This is the body that holds all other parts together. Think of it as the house in which every moving piece lives. Milled from steel, it absorbs recoil, anchors the shooter's hand, and provides rails for the slide to glide upon. Its angle was chosen carefully by John Browning so that when you raise the pistol, it naturally aims where your eyes are already looking and your index finger is already pointing. Fitted to the grip frame is the slide, the long steel sleeve that rides back and forth on top. The slide is the engine block of the pistol. Inside it are the firing pin, cartridge extractor, and riding on top are the sights, all traveling together like passengers in a speeding locomotive. When the gun fires, the slide races backward, carrying away the spent shell and preparing the next round for action. The slide next slams forward at breakneck speed, chambering fresh ammunition. That reciprocating motion is the heartbeat of the 1911. Beneath the slide lives the barrel, but it doesn't sit still. The 1911's barrel tilts slightly every time the pistol fires. Browning designed it this way so that the barrel locks tightly to the slide when pressure is highest, then unlocks just as the bullet leaves the muzzle. It is like a door that seals itself before a storm hits, then opens only when the danger has passed. This clever movement allows those hefty .45 caliber cartridges to be fired safely without destroying the pistol. Holding the barrel and slide in harmony is the link in locking lugs, small pieces of steel that control the barrel's tilt. These parts work like the hinges of a vault door, allowing the barrel to lock solidly during firing and unlock smoothly afterward. Without them, the entire system would collapse into chaos. Under the barrel is the reciprocating or recoil spring and guide rod, the muscles of the pistol. When the slide moves backward, the recoil spring compresses, storing energy like a coiled snake. That energy is then released to shove the slide forward again, chambering the next round. If the recoil spring is too weak, the slide slams violently, too strong, and the pistol may not cycle properly. Browning chose the balance perfectly. Inside the slide sits the firing pin, a slender steel rod that acts like a tiny hammer. When struck by the hammer, it flies forward and hits the primer of the cartridge, igniting the powder. The firing pin is restrained by a spring so it does not drift forward accidentally, ensuring the pistol only fires when commanded. As the slide continues rearward, the empty shell hits the ejector, a small steel finger mounted in the frame. This sends the shell flying out of the ejection port like a kicked pebble, clearing the way for the next round. Now to the human interface, the trigger. Unlike many pistols, the 1911's trigger moves straight back rather than pivoting. It slides like a drawer opening, pushing the sear out of engagement with the hammer. This gives the 1911 its legendary trigger feel, clean, predictable, and crisp like snapping a glass rod. The trigger acts on the sear and hammer, the core firing system. The hammer is the stored energy held under spring tension like a drawn bow. The sear is the tiny latch holding that bowstring in place. When the trigger is pressed, the sear releases the hammer, which snaps forward and strikes the firing pin. In that instant, a quiet mechanical promise becomes explosive reality. There is also the disconnector, a clever little part that ensures the pistol can only fire one round per trigger pull. Even if the trigger is held back, the disconnector forces the shooter to release and reset before firing again. It is the mechanical conscience of the pistol, preventing uncontrolled firing. Every time the slide cycles, all these parts perform their choreography. The hammer cocks, the sear and trigger reset, the magazine lifts a fresh round, the barrel tilts and locks, the extractor hooks, the ejector kicks, the recoil spring coils and releases. It happens in less than the blink of an eye, yet every movement is deliberate, controlled, and repeatable. What makes the 1911 miraculous is not any single part, but how these parts work together with absolute trust in one another. It is not a collection of steel, it is a mini cosmos, an intricate system, a conversation between metal pieces that agree, every time, to perform the same ritual. When you press the trigger on a 1911 pistol, you are not simply firing a weapon, you are setting into motion a century-old symphony, written by John Moses Browning, conducted by your hands, and performed by steel that has never forgotten its music. Chapter 6. The 1911 has its eyes opened. When John Moses Browning sketched the lines of the Colt 1911, warfare still assumed sunlight. Battles happened in open fields or well-lit streets. A pistol's sights were three simple bumps of steel, meant to be aligned by eye and instinct. For decades that was enough. But as the world grew darker, literally darker, with night operations, windowless buildings, underground tunnels, and power failures, the old pistol had to learn a new trick: how to see when human eyes could not. The earliest attempts were crude. Shooters painted their front sights with white enamel or scratched grooves into rear notches to catch ambient light. Then came tritium night sights, tiny glass vials filled with glowing gas that burned invisibly for a decade without batteries. For the first time, a shooter could draw a pistol in pitch blackness and still see three floating green dots hovering over the threat. The real revolution arrived when electronics shrank. Red dot optics had existed on rifles for years, but pistols were too small and too violent. Slides slammed back and forth thousands of times, battering fragile electronics into failure. Yet engineers kept trying, and eventually they succeeded. A pistol-mounted red dot does not project a beam onto the target. Instead, it reflects a tiny glowing dot onto a special piece of glass, a mirror that only the shooter can see. You no longer line up front sight, rear sight, and target. You simply place the dot where you want the bullet to go. The human brain is astonishingly fast at centering shapes, and shooters found that under stress, the dot was easier to use than iron sights. In dark hallways, smoke-filled rooms, or rain-soaked doorways, the glowing red ember became a lighthouse for the eye. To mount these optics, the 1911 slide had to be altered. Gunsmiths began milling rectangular windows into hardened steel slides, carefully shaping each cut so the optic would sit low enough to co-witness with standard iron sights. It was a surgical operation, one mistake away from ruining a $1,000 part. But once complete, the pistol felt reborn, a century-old design now peering through digital eyes. Then came rails. The forward underside of the 1911's frame had once been smooth and elegant, like the belly of a racing yacht. Now it sprouted a short metal track, a standardized strip of slots that allowed tools to be snapped on and off like Lego bricks. This rail transformed the pistol from a simple firearm into a platform. The most important of these tools was the weapon-mounted light. A flashlight in the support hand works until you need that hand to open a door, drag a wounded friend, or hold a phone. A light attached directly to the pistol frees the shooter to do everything else. With a thumb press, a beam of white fire explodes forward, turning darkness into day. Threats reveal themselves instantly. The world becomes readable again. Lasers followed a similar path. They paint the target with a tiny dot of light, visible even when the shooter cannot raise the pistol to eye level. From behind cover, from awkward angles, or while injured, a laser lets a shooter aim when aiming should be impossible. Some dismiss them as gimmicks, but in real fights they saved real lives. Even the humble grip was reinvented. Polymer panels replaced wood. G10 laminates brought traction in rain and sweat. Front straps, where 3 fingers gripped the pistol, were checkered, stippled, or scalloped to glue the gun into trembling hands. Thumb safeties grew larger and ambidextrous. Grip safeties were bumped out further to ensure proper engagement. Magazine wells flared outward like trumpet bells, guiding fresh magazines home smoothly during reloads when seconds felt like minutes. Under the hood, the changes were quieter but just as profound. Match-grade barrels tightened tolerances. Dual recoil springs softened slide velocity. Corrosion-proof finishes resisted salt, air, and blood alike. What once required a master craftsman could now be repeated with machine-level precision. Yet for all this evolution, the heart of the 1911 never changed. The trigger still moved straight to the rear. The grip angle still pointed naturally. The pistol still balanced like a well-thrown hammer. Red dots, rails, lasers, and lights were not replacements for Browning's genius. They were lenses placed over it, allowing the old machine to operate in a world its creator could never have imagined. The Colt 1911 learned to see in the dark, and in doing so, proved once again that true craftsmanship does not resist change. It absorbs it, bends it, and makes it its own. Chapter 7. Steel as Canvas, Craft, Control, and Becoming One with the 1911. There is a moment, familiar to anyone who has ever held a well-made 1911, when the pistol seems to disappear. The steel no longer feels cold. The weight no longer registers. It becomes less an object and more an extension of your intent, as if the mind has reached out and taken physical form. That sensation is not accidental. It is the result of a century of craftsmanship, refinement, and human attention poured into a design that invited hands to shape it. From the beginning, the 1911 was meant to be tuned. John Browning built it with tolerances that assumed skilled fitting. Early factory workers at Colt didn't simply assemble pistols. They coaxed them into harmony. Slides were stoned, sears polished, barrels fitted by eye and feel. That tradition never died. It merely left the factory floor and moved into the small workshops of independent gunsmiths, where the pistol became a canvas. The trigger is always the first conversation between shooter and gun. On a good 1911, it does not arc or hinge, it is not loose, gritty, or sluggish. It moves straight back like a door sliding on rails. When a gunsmith tunes it, he is sculpting pressure itself. The sear and hammer hooks are polished until they meet like glass plates. Springs are selected to give just enough resistance that the trigger feels alive but never uncertain. When it breaks, it does not snap. It releases as though the pistol has made a deliberate decision. Grips are where the shooter leaves fingerprints on the design. Wood was once king, but modern shooters choose aggressive G10 laminates, stippled polymers, or hand-cut checkering that bites gently into the skin. The front strap may be textured so the gun never squirms under recoil. Even the shape of the grip safety is refined, extended so the web of the hand is always protected, always in command. Barrels, slides, and internal parts are tuned with the same reverence. Match barrels are lapped smooth inside so the bullet travels without resistance, guided as carefully as a train on polished rails. Slides may be lightened to soften recoil, or engraved to mark a personal story. Springs are balanced so the pistol cycles not violently, but rhythmically like a well-timed heartbeat. To shoot a 1911 properly is not to wrestle it but to partner with it. The grip begins high on the backstrap, the web of the hand nestled firmly under the beaver tail safety. The support hand wraps around the firing hand, thumbs resting naturally forward. This creates a living clamp of flesh and bone that tames recoil before it even begins. Aiming in 1911 is an exercise in patience. Whether using iron sights, a laser, or a red dot, the eye must learn to trust alignment over instinct. With irons, the front sight is king. It is the lighthouse in the storm, crisp and centered between the rear posts. The target blurs, the front sight stays sharp. With a red dot, the eye floats, letting the glowing ember settle into place like a star docking into orbit. Recoil becomes a rhythm. The heavy steel frame absorbs the violence, spreading it across the palm, up the arms, through the shoulders. A proper grip lets the muzzle rise and fall like a wave breaking and retreating, always returning to the same horizon. Follow-up shots are not rushed, they are invited. The 1911 does not demand obedience. It rewards understanding. Its steel invites hands to shape it, and its operation invites the mind to slow down in a world obsessed with speed. Each custom part, each polished surface, each disciplined shot is part of the same story, a century-old design still teaching modern humans how to be better with their tools, and perhaps with themselves. Chapter 8. Carried into the fire, the 1911 in the hands of warriors. The Colt 1911 did not become immortal because it was perfect. It became immortal because it refused not to. The interwar years were the quiet forging of legend. In police departments across the United States, the Colt 1911 replaced revolvers in the holsters of men who fought bank robbers and gangsters armed with Tommy guns. The pistol was not glamorous. It was heavy, slow to reload, and unforgiving of neglect. But officers learned its habits and trusted it the way one trusts a seasoned partner who has already proven his loyalty. The pistol rode ashore in Normandy, soaked with seawater before it ever fired a shot. Soldiers stripped them in foxholes, drying parts over small fires made from shattered crates. In North Africa, sand crept into every seam. Tankers carried them because climbing out of a burning Sherman while holding a rifle was nearly impossible. Airmen wore them in shoulder rigs because survival after a crash was never guaranteed. In the Pacific, the jungle made its own rules. Rust bloomed overnight. Leather holsters turned into sponges. Marines learned to sleep with their pistols under their shirts, the warmth of the body fighting corrosion. One Guadalcanal veteran said that after months in the field, his pistol's finish was gone, the metal raw and gray, but it still fed, fired, and ejected like it had on day one. Korea tested men in ways even the Pacific had not. The chosen reservoir campaign froze blood in veins and oil into glue. Weapons failed, fingers failed, courage failed. A Marine later described thawing his 1911 by breathing on it inside his parka while artillery shook the mountains. When the Chinese surged through the snow, his pistol fired. Vietnam was a war of darkness and tight spaces. Tunnel rats crawled into black holes armed with nothing but a flashlight and a pistol. They filed their front sights sharper, wrapped their grips in tape, and prayed the gun would not jam when the walls closed in. One tunnel rat wrote that his Colt was short enough to aim in hell. When Desert Storm erupted in 1990, the pistol faced a new set of challenges. The Middle Eastern desert, with its fine sand and blistering heat, was merciless on machinery. Soldiers reported that even the most modern plastic pistols could jam under the constant abrasive assault of desert dust. The 1911, with its all-steel construction and simple, robust design, handled the environment better than most. Sand would be brushed away, springs oiled, and as usual, the Browning would continue to feed and fire. Global militaries also recognized the American 1911's value. The pistol was exported, licensed, or adopted by forces around the world. From Southeast Asia to South America, it became a standard for specialized units. In countries without advanced manufacturing, the pistol was prized for its simplicity. Gunsmiths could repair it with hand tools and basic equipment, an advantage over more complex, modern designs. Stories abound of pistols salvaged from decades-old arsenals, stripped, cleaned, and restored to full service. A Southeast Asian Special Forces officer recounted retrieving a 1911 from a dusty armory that had not fired in 30 years. After a careful disassembly, lubrication, and a few test rounds, it was ready for duty, still deadly accurate. The 1911's global role was not limited to Western militaries. Non-state actors and paramilitary groups recognized its lethality and reliability. It was often captured, modified, and reused in conflicts around the world. Even today, the pistol continues to evolve. Cerakote and other advanced finishes resist corrosion from salt, sand, and sweat. Custom grips abound, allowing operation in even the most extreme climates, from desert heat to Arctic cold. Night sights and optics expand capabilities in urban and low-light environments. Dual recoil springs and lightened slides reduce wear on the action, ensuring that the pistol remains serviceable for decades of rigorous use. By the time America formally replaced the 1911 with the Italian Beretta M9 in the 1980s, the Colt was already a legend. But legends don't retire. Marine Corps armorers rebuilt old pistols with modern parts. Special operations units quietly ordered custom guns. In Fallujah, in Ramadi, in unnamed rooms with no windows, Men cleared spaces that had never known electricity, their pistols lit by weapon lights that John Browning could never have imagined. One operator later said that when a door burst open at 2 in the morning and chaos flooded the room, he did not remember aiming. He remembered seeing the front sight floating in the beam of his light. He pressed the trigger and the pistol answered. A century of war has carried the 1911 across continents and into every kind of nightmare humans can invent. It has been buried, frozen, soaked, and burned. It has been carried by boys who never left their hometowns and by veterans who had forgotten what home felt like. And still, when the hand closes around that familiar steel frame, when the trigger takes up its slack and the front sight rises into focus, the Colt 1911 does what it has always done. It refuses to die. Chapter 9. In Every Hand, the 1911 in Civilian Life and American Culture. The 1920s were turbulent in ways no history book fully captures. Organized crime, Prohibition-era violence, and labor unrest made personal safety a pressing concern. Federal agents relied on the 1911 to enforce laws against heavily armed bootleggers. One famous anecdote tells of an agent confronting a gang in Chicago, pistol drawn, with a single magazine in his hand. When the smoke cleared, only the sound of his Colt cycling echoed, and the criminals had fled. Newspapers loved the story, embellishing it, but the essence was true. The 1911 could deliver calm authority in the storm of human violence. For ordinary civilians, the pistol became an extension of self-reliance. Farmers carried it into barns where drunken laborers threatened property. Shopkeepers placed it under counters, trusted more than the night watchman. Letters to Colt from the 1930s and 1940s describe men who fired the pistol in defense of their homes, often in pitch darkness, often against multiple intruders. In every case, it was not just stopping power but reliability that mattered. In one widely cited report, a small-town grocer used a single 1911 to confront a would-be robber. The pistol jammed once under heavy rain, but a quick tap to the magazine and the slide and it functioned again without hesitation. Stories like this spread quietly, creating a folk reputation alongside official reports. Meanwhile, shooting competitions transformed the 1911 into a precision instrument. By the 1930s and 1940s, bullseye shooters had discovered the ergonomic brilliance Browning embedded into the pistol. The natural grip angle, the straight traveling trigger, and the short reset allowed competitors to fire multiple rounds with minimal disruption to aim. Ken Ballou, one of the early marksmen, became legendary for his ability to shoot tight groups at 25 yards, demonstrating that the pistol was as effective for careful calculation as for rapid defense. Speed shooting competitions introduced another layer of skill. Jerry Miculek, decades later, would famously fire 15 rounds in under 2 seconds, a feat impossible without a pistol that responded predictably and balanced perfectly in the hand. The 1911's recoil, while stout, allowed the shooter to stay on target with practice, turning a weapon once designed for stopping a man in close quarters into a finely tuned instrument for precision sport. The civilian fascination also inspired modifications. Shooters began experimenting with tuned triggers, hand-fitted barrels, and custom grips. Each improvement was not simply mechanical but personal. The pistol became an expression of the shooter's rhythm, timing, and personality. Front straps were checkered or stippled, rear sights adjusted for eye dominance, and slides polished or skeletonized to reduce mass. Even cosmetic features, engraving, finishes, custom grips, became statements of identity. A Colt 1911 in a competitive shooter's hand was a partnership, a dialogue of steel and human instinct. Pop culture, too, embraced the pistol. It appeared on silver screens in noir films, in pulp novels, and in later action cinema as the weapon of choice for heroes and anti-heroes alike. The gun became shorthand for professionalism, decisiveness, and trustworthiness. From detectives in dark alleys to lawmen in small-town dramas, the 1911's image solidified as part of the American psyche. Collectors began preserving war-era models, mint-condition Colts, and rare factory variants, blending history with artistry. Civilian defense continued to evolve alongside law enforcement and competition. Concealed carry emerged as a practical application, and the 1911 adapted. Smaller grips, compact models, and lighter finishes allowed the heavy steel design to be carried comfortably while retaining all the virtues Browning had built in: balance, ergonomics, and trigger feel. Even into the modern era, the pistol's story in civilian life reflects a marriage of tradition and innovation. Night sights, red dot optics, rails, and lights became available to the home defender and competitive shooter alike. Every new adaptation respected the original design, enhancing it without breaking the rhythm of Browning's magnum opus. A pistol tricked out with a laser, flashlight, and tritium sights is still the same old 1911 in a new suit, a steel conversation between hand, mind, and target. In a sense, the 1911 tells the story of America itself. It is practical yet aspirational, tough yet capable of beauty, reliable yet endlessly adaptable, and when all is said and done, it is still here. To hold a 1911 is to hold a century of innovation, conflict, and craft. To shoot it is to participate in a tradition that values skill, judgment, and precision above all. Have you experienced the thrill for yourself? By the end of the 20th century, the Colt 1911 had transcended categories. It was no longer simply a military sidearm, no longer merely a civilian defensive tool, and no longer just a competition pistol. It has become a cultural touchstone, a symbol of the enduring human desire to perfect what works and to adapt it to every challenge life presents. Every story, every anecdote, and every carefully fitted part underscores a single truth: the 1911 is more than a firearm. It is a living, breathing chapter of American history that, in this 21st century, continues to write itself in the hands of those who carry it. Chapter 10. Against the Clock, the 1911 in Modern Law Enforcement and SWAT. When police departments across America began transitioning to high-capacity, 9mm polymer-framed pistols in the late 20th century, many assumed the Colt 1911 would finally become a museum piece. Administrators valued standardization, high magazine capacity, and ease of training. Yet on the sharp edge of law enforcement, in SWAT teams, fugitive task forces, and high-risk warrant service, Old Faithful never went away. Veteran officers trusted what they knew. Many had learned to shoot on 1911s during military service or competitive careers. They spoke of the trigger the way musicians speak of instruments. A clean break, no hesitation, no surprises. In situations where an officer might be forced to take a single, irreplaceable shot through a doorway crowded with chaos, that predictability mattered more than an extra handful of cartridges. Early SWAT teams in the 1970s were built by men who had learned tactics the hard way. They trained obsessively, shot constantly, and modified their equipment by trial and error. The 1911 became a favorite for entry teams because it was slim, balanced, and devastatingly effective at close range. Some departments quietly allowed officers to carry personally owned pistols, provided they could qualify at higher standards. Many chose tuned 1911s. One California officer recalled serving a high-risk warrant on a fortified drug house in the early 1980s. The team breached a rear door only to be met with gunfire through thin interior walls. Visibility collapsed in seconds. He fired twice through drywall, aiming only by instinct and sound. Later, after the suspect was taken into custody, they found both rounds had struck within inches of one another, a testament not to luck, but to years of practice with a trigger that responded exactly the same way every time. As tactics evolved, so did the pistol. Weapon-mounted lights became standard. Suddenly officers could flood rooms with light without tying up their support hand. Rails were machined into frames, sometimes by armorers working late at night with jigs and files. Tritium sights glowed in dark hallways. Grips became more aggressive. Magazine wells flared out to speed reloads when stress made fine motor skills vanish. In the 1990s and early 2000s, hostage rescue teams experimented with optics. Mounting red dots on pistols was still controversial, but teams tasked with precision shooting in low-light environments saw the potential. The glowing dot floated above iron sights like a tiny promise. Put the dot here and the bullet will follow. 4 barricaded suspects hiding behind furniture or under beds. For shots taken across cluttered living rooms, the advantage was undeniable. The 1911 also found a place in plainclothes units and fugitive task forces. These officers worked alone or in small teams, often confronting armed suspects in parking lots, motels, or crowded apartments. They wanted pistols that shot flat, were controllable, and decisive. One U.S. Marshal described chasing a violent felon into a hotel stairwell where the lights had been shot out. With his weapon light blazing and his 1911 drawn, he cornered the suspect on a landing barely wider than a closet. He later said the pistol felt like it was bolted to my arm, and when he pressed the trigger, the fight ended. Training doctrine changed around the pistol. Officers were taught to grip high, lock wrists, drive the front sight into the target, and press the trigger without disturbing alignment. Stress inoculation drills, low light, loud noise, moving targets, were introduced to replicate the chaos of real operations. Through all of it, the 1911 simple manual of arms and consistent trigger remained a constant, a familiar anchor in an unfamiliar storm. Today, in 2026, the 1911 in law enforcement is no longer common, but it is still revered. It appears in the holsters of specialized officers who choose it deliberately, not out of nostalgia, but out of confidence earned through repetition and trust. These pistols are often hand-built, their parts fitted by armorers who understand both the machine and the men who carry it. The Colt 1911 has never been the easiest pistol to carry. It is heavy, demanding, and unforgiving of neglect. But for those tasked with solving problems where hesitation is measured in lives, it offers something few tools can: absolute predictability in moments when nothing else is predictable. In police lockers and quiet armories across the country, the old steel pistol still waits. And when the call comes that cannot be ignored, it answers, not with fashion or flash, but with the quiet certainty of a century spent against the clock. If the last few years are any indication, the 1911 is on its way back in a big way. Just wait and see. The Colt 1911 has never been merely a tool. For over a century, it has transcended function, entering the realm of artistry, history, and obsession. To hold an original 1911, whether a Hartford-era military issue or a finely tuned modern custom build, is to feel the pulse of human ingenuity, the fusion of steel, purpose, and the hands that shaped it. Collectors and historians around the world understand this intimately, and their stories reveal as much about the people as they do about the pistol itself. Collectors often begin with necessity but stay for reverence. Some start with a military surplus pistol, the barrel pitted and pocked and the slide scratched, an artifact of conflict. In the hands of a historian, each scratch and dent tells a story. A soldier crawling through mud in France, a marine in the Pacific jungle, a lawman confronting a desperate criminal. One collector in New England recounted tracing the history of a 1911 that had been shipped to the Philippines in the 1930s, later returned to the U.S., and finally sold at a local auction. He carefully restored the finish and rebuilt the magazine, but he refused to polish the barrel. "Every imperfection is a fingerprint of history," he said. "Wiping them away would be like erasing a page from the story." Museums have treated the 1911 with similar care. The National Firearms Museum in Virginia preserves models spanning decades. Early military pistols, rare factory prototypes, and experimental variants. Visitors can see subtle differences between the Colt-issued pistols of World War I and earlier, the Parkerized 1911 A1 models issued in World War II, and the National Match Competition models of the 1950s, with their hand-fitted barrels, tuned triggers, and specialized sights. Each artifact is displayed not merely as a firearm, but as a testament to the evolution of engineering, craftsmanship, and American industry. Custom gunsmiths have also elevated the 1911 to the level of fine art. Names like Ed Brown, Nighthawk Custom, Wilson Combat, Les Baer, Alchemy Custom Weaponry, Jason Burton, Spardella Arms, and many others are synonymous with hand-fitted, personalized pistols. The 1911 is still going strong. These modern craftsmen take the original design, the geometry, the balance, the trigger, the sights, and refine the gun to perfection. Various cartridges, polished feed ramps, skeletonized hammers, lightened slides, and finely stippled grips transform the pistol into a masterpiece of both form and function. Some are built purely for competition, tuned for every thousandth of an inch to produce perfect groups at distance. Others are ornamental, engraved with intricate scrollwork, initials, or scenes from history, demonstrating that a firearm can be both lethal and beautiful. The collector's market has stories as vivid as the battlefield. In the 1970s, a rare early Colt 1911A1 surfaced in a small shop in rural Texas, unassuming and dirty. Experts later confirmed it as one of the earliest production runs intended for the U.S. Army. The pistol had been carried, not preserved, and bore the wear of decades of service. It sold for thousands of dollars, a figure dwarfed today by its symbolic value. Collectors track serial numbers meticulously, chasing factory records and service history like detectives, assembling pistols into narrative families. Wartime production, national match teams, police service, or civilian competition. Even within families of 1911s, variety is staggering. The Colt National Match pistols of the 1950s, with their tuned triggers and tight tolerances, are almost surgical instruments compared to standard-issue service pistols. Government-issued pistols from the 1940s are weighty, reliable, and simple, tools built for survival rather than elegance. Then there are experimental models, prototypes, and limited editions. Aluminum frames, endless color choices, double-stack high-capacity magazines, stainless steel and chrome variations. Small thumb safeties, large thumb safeties, shorten the beaver tails, extended beaver tail grip safeties, skeletonized hammers and triggers, variations on stippling texture, extended magazine release buttons, modern variations of front and rear slide serrations, and high-grade engraved pistols that showcase both Colt's ambition and the market's fascination with refinement. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of firearm collecting is the human story. Families preserve pistols as heirlooms, passing them down with letters, photographs, and oral histories. A 1911 may be accompanied by a soldier's uniform, medals, holster, and personal notes. The pistol becomes a vessel for memory, a tangible link between generations. One collector described receiving a 1911 from his grandfather, a World War II Marine, with the instruction, "Take care of her. She'll take care of you." That personal bond mirrors the historical trust soldiers placed in the pistol across every battlefield. Cultural impact is equally enduring. The 1911 appears in films, books, and video games, representing authority, precision, and tradition. Some collectors specifically focus on 1911s used in famous motion pictures. Its aesthetic lines, balance, and ergonomics make it instantly recognizable, even to those who have never handled one. Ultimately, the 1911's place in museums, private collections, and historical scholarship demonstrates a rare combination of durability, elegance, and story. It is a firearm that survives not merely because it is useful, but because it embodies a philosophy that careful design, precise execution, and respect for the human hand create something that endures far beyond its original purpose. Each pistol carries the fingerprints of soldiers, craftsmen, and owners, literal and figurative, and together they form a narrative that is at once mechanical, personal, and profoundly human. These accounts may have grown in the retelling, but they left an undeniable impression. The military wanted a sidearm that could end a fight instantly. In the trenches of World War I, the .45 slug earned its reputation. German stormtroopers did not attack from polite distances. They burst from dugouts and tunnels with knives, pistols, and grenades. In such moments there was no time for cool calculation. The .45 spoke loudly, punching through heavy wool uniforms, web gear, and whatever else lay between shooter and target. Veterans carried home stories of enemies collapsing instantly, and while no cartridge guarantees an outcome, the perception of reliability became as important as reality. The man-stopping caliber provided peace of mind. World War II carried the legend forward. From North Africa to Normandy to the Pacific Islands, the .45 pistol was everywhere. Soldiers learned to recognize its sound in the chaos of battle, a deeper note amid the sharper cracks of rifles. It was often the last line of defense when rifles jammed or ran dry. Tank crews trapped inside burning vehicles fired it blindly through hatches. Pilots down behind enemy lines relied on it to buy seconds they did not have. It became part of the emotional landscape of war, the cartridge that spoke when nothing else could. Yet the mystique of stopping power remains both powerful and misunderstood. No handgun round is magic. Shot placement, training, and composure matter more than caliber. But the .45 ACP offers something psychological as well as physical. When a shooter presses the trigger on a 1911 and feels that heavy recoil, hears that unmistakable report, and watches the front sight lift and settle, there is a sense that something significant has just happened. It is not just a bullet traveling downrange. It is a statement of serious intent. In the end, the .45 ACP is not legendary because it is perfect, it is legendary because it is legitimate. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. A large, slow-moving piece of metal designed to end a fight within the distances where human conflict most often occurs. Paired with the Colt 1911, it forms a dialogue between shooter and history, a voice that has echoed across a century of battlefields, police encounters, competitions, and quiet moments at the range. Together, the pistol and its cartridge tell a story of perfect balance, between speed and weight, technology and tradition, myth and measurable performance. It is a story still being written every time a shooter loads a magazine, chambers a round, and listens for that familiar, thunderous reply. Chapter 13: Steel in the Shadows, the 1911 in crime, law enforcement, and the war between them. By the time the Colt 1911 had become a symbol of American military power, it had also quietly crossed another line. It had entered the streets. War always sends technology home with the men who carried it, and when soldiers returned from the great conflicts of the 20th century, many of them brought with them not just memories but skills, habits, and a deep familiarity with a pistol that no longer felt like government property. The 1911 became part of civilian life, and once it did, it became entangled in the complicated, uneasy dance between crime and the law. In the roaring 20s and 30s, America was awash in surplus firearms. Prohibition had created an underworld that required muscle, and muscle required weapons. While the Thompson submachine gun became the celebrity of organized crime, the Colt 1911 was the quiet professional, concealable, powerful, and reliable. It slipped into shoulder holsters under pinstripe suits, rode in glove boxes, and lay hidden in desk drawers of men who never expected to be heroes. Bank robbers favored it because it fed smoothly and hit hard. Detectives respected it for the same reasons. When two sides of the law carry the same tool, it ceases to be a mere object and becomes part of the culture of conflict itself. Police departments were slow at first to abandon revolvers, but the 1911 had an irresistible appeal. Officers who had served in World War I returned home with a preference for a pistol that reloaded quickly and pointed naturally. In the cramped interiors of Model T patrol cars, the unlit alleyways of the city and the smoky backrooms of the speakeasy, the advantages of the 1911 were obvious. One well-placed magazine of the .45 was worth more than 6 hesitant shots from a wheel gun. Stories circulated in precinct houses about officers surviving gunfights because their 1911s kept running when dirt, blood, mud, or even broken grips crippled other lesser weapons. There were tales of pistols recovered from river bottoms, cleaned with little more than gasoline and a rag, then returned to duty. These were not cheap, contrived marketing claims. They were barroom testimonies, passed from veteran to rookie with the weight of lived experience. Criminals, of course, learned quickly. The 1911 was not just a police gun, it was power. It appeared in the hands of mafia, bootleggers, bank robbers, contract killers, and men who had no intention of surrendering quietly. Its flat profile made it easy to conceal under coats, and its heavy bullet had a storied reputation that traveled faster than newsprint. When a witness exclaimed, "It was a big automatic," everyone knew what that meant. Even Hollywood noticed. Gritty film noir detectives in rumpled suits held 1911s low at their sides as they moved through shadowy alleyways and smoky pool halls. Gangsters fired them from car windows in grainy black and white reels. Each appearance reinforced the idea that this pistol belonged wherever tension lived, not just on foreign battlefields, but in the moral gray zones of daily American life. By the 1960s and 70s, the landscape shifted yet again. Police departments faced rising violent crime, and debates erupted over caliber, capacity, and training. New pistols entered the scene, many of them lighter and holding more rounds, but Browning's triumph refused to disappear. Instead, it only retreated slightly, becoming the choice of the specialist. SWAT officers, federal agents, detectives, and champion competition shooters who preferred a weapon that rewarded practice. There are accounts from this era of officers who tuned their own pistols late at night in basement workshops, polishing feed ramps and fitting new barrels because the gun mattered to them on a personal level. These were not merely government-issued tools, they were trusted companions. Each ding, dent, and scratch told a story, each modification was an answer to a lesson learned under pressure. On the other side of the line, criminals like Al Capone, John Dillinger, and Bonnie and Clyde adapted as well. Stolen military pistols circulated through black markets. A well-maintained 1911 could pass through a dozen hands in a decade, leaving behind nothing but rumors. When it surfaced again in a crime scene photo, it carried with it not just ballistics but a kind of dark heritage. The war between law and lawlessness has never had a final chapter. But throughout the 20th century, the 1911 was one of its most persistent characters. It sat quietly in lockers at precinct houses, rode in shoulder rigs under detective jackets, waited willingly under shop counters, and slept in dresser drawers or nested on nightstands in countless American homes that hoped never to need it. It was neither hero nor villain, only a constant and reassuring presence wherever human conflict refused to be tidy. Chapter 14. The 1911 in Competition, Precision, Speed, and the Pursuit of Mastery. The Colt 1911 has always been more than a tool of survival. Its unique ergonomics, crisp trigger, and predictable recoil made it a natural choice for competitive shooting long before the term practical pistol ever existed. What began as informal shooting matches in the 1920s eventually evolved into national and international competitions, where the 1911 would dominate, shape rules, and define standards of excellence. Bullseye shooting, also called precision pistol competition, became the first arena where the 1911 proved itself outside of combat. Competitors discovered that the 1911's 74-degree grip angle instinctively aligned the front sight with the target, allowing for more natural aiming. Its short, straight travel trigger enabled controlled shots with minimal disturbance to sight picture. Skilled shooters could fire rapid sequences without losing precision. Early champions like Harry Reeves, Charles Askins, Elmer Keith, Jeff Cooper, and Jerry Mikulek recounted how tuning their 1911s for smooth operation, polishing the feed ramps, adjusting the hammer-sear engagement, and balancing and tightening the slide, could make a tangible difference in scores. One story tells of a competitor at the national matches in the 1950s who hand-fitted a pistol so precisely that it consistently grouped 10 shots within a single inch at 25 yards, an astonishing feat for that era. As the decades progressed, practical shooting competitions emerged, emphasizing speed and agility. Events like IPSC, International Practical Shooting Confederation, tested the ability to engage multiple targets quickly, reload efficiently, and maintain accuracy under stress. Here, the 1911's combination of balance, weight, and recoil management shown. Expert shooters like Ken Hackathorn, Bill Wilson, and Rob Leatham could fire double taps, 2 rapid shots at one target, without losing alignment on the next target. The weight of the forged steel frame absorbed recoil more predictably than lighter plastic guns, allowing faster follow-up shots. Some competitors modified their pistols with extended magazine wells, high-visibility sights, and 3-pound triggers in order to shave fractions of a second from stage times, blending Browning's original design with modern innovations. The pistol's influence even extended to speed shooting legends. Jerry Mikulek and Rob Leatham, American shooters famous for their near-superhuman rate of fire, often credit the 1911 as the ideal platform for controlled rapid-fire shooting. They demonstrated that, with practice, the 1911 can deliver a precise burst of bullets in less than a second while maintaining remarkable accuracy. Observers often marvel not just at the speed but at the consistency. The pistol shoots flat, that is, it returns to its natural point of aim after every shot, making follow-up fire intuitive rather than chaotic. For civilians, competition created a culture of craftsmanship and improvement. Shooters experimented with grips, slide serrations, recoil spring weights and material, and even trigger shoe shapes and materials to optimize performance. Custom gunsmiths like King's Gun Works, Armand Swenson, Wayne Novak, Ed Brown, Wilson Combat, and Nighthawk responded with hand-fitted pistols designed specifically for competitive use. Today, pistols made by these heavyweights of the gunsmith world are highly collectible, so go get you one. Women and youth shooters also embraced the 1911, particularly as shorter, lighter models became available. Shooting clubs reported that novices could learn proper stance, grip, trigger control, and sight alignment more effectively on a 1911 than on other designs. The pistol's weight helped mitigate recoil for first-time shooters, giving them a stable platform while they learned the fundamentals. Perhaps the most compelling anecdote of all comes from the world stage. In the 1970s and 1980s, American competitors using 1911s frequently dominated international events. They learned not just to shoot fast or accurately, but to master the psychology of competition, anticipation, rhythm, and stress management. Ultimately, the 1911 in competition is a lesson in adaptability. From the trenches of World War I to indoor ranges and open-air shooting sports, it continues to reward respect, training, and meticulous care. Each competition stage becomes a dialogue between shooter and machine, and every successful run reinforces the simple truth Browning understood more than a century ago. When you get it right, a tool can transcend its original purpose and inspire excellence in every hand that carries it. Chapter 15: The Art of the Frame, the Modern Masters Who Reinvented the 1911. Together they bridged the gap between match gun and duty gun, creating 1911s that were beautiful, but also brutally practical. Today you can watch these gentlemen speak about the history and customization of the 1911 on the Wilson Combat YouTube channel. Check it out. If Wilson represents reliability, then Wayne Novak, who apprenticed under Armand Swenson, represents clarity. Novak's greatest gift to the 1911 world was not a frame or a trigger, but a sight. Before Novak, pistol sights were often tiny nubs atop the pistol frame, barely visible in dim light. His low-profile, snag-free rear sight design transformed practical shooting. Suddenly shooters could draw from concealment without tearing their clothes or having the gun snag and still acquire a clear sight picture in an instant. Novak's sights became so universal that many shooters today forget they were once revolutionary. Novak's shop, Novak's guns, became synonymous with functional refinement. Improvements you notice only when they're missing. Then there is Les Baer, a man whose name has become shorthand for mechanical tightness. Bear pistols are famous for their almost shocking fit when new. Slides feel welded to frames until hundreds of rounds wear them into a silky glide. His philosophy is unapologetically old school. Precision comes from friction mastered, not avoided. Bear's pistols are not gentle introductions. They are machines that demand commitment. Owners often speak of their Bears the way classic car enthusiasts speak of engines that must be broken in by hand. Once settled, however, they shoot with astonishing accuracy and buttery smoothness, the product of a mind obsessed with tight tolerances and alignment. At the pinnacle of extravagance sits Cabot Guns, a company that reimagined what custom could mean when money and imagination are allowed to roam freely in the wild. Cabot builds pistols from solid billets of stainless steel, sometimes using meteorite, Damascus, or mirror-polished aerospace alloys. Their pistols are often paired, engraved, serialized like fine art. A Cabot 1911 is not something you slip into a duty holster. It is something you display under glass when not shooting it, a symbol of how far the platform can be pushed when exquisite craftsmanship is allowed to become spectacle. Across the country, a quieter revolution was taking place in the workshop of Jason Burton of Heirloom Precision. Whereas Wilson Combat focuses on scalable perfection, Burton embraces the idea of the one-off masterpiece. Each Burton pistol is not just fitted, it is interpreted. His classic lines are subtle, his edges softened, his finishes restrained but flawless. Collectors sometimes wait years for a Burton build, and when they finally receive one, it is often spoken of less like a tool and more like a family heirloom. His work reminds the 1911 community that the 1911 pistol is not only a platform but a medium. And in their hands, the 1911 ceased to be merely a service pistol. It became something rarer, a mechanical autobiography. Every custom build tells the story of the person who made it and the person who commissioned it. The scratches, the finishes, the geometry hidden beneath grips and safeties. All of it is a record of human obsession with getting something just right. In a world obsessed with the newest plastics and the next firmware update, the custom 1911 community quietly persists. It is slower, more deliberate, almost defiant. It insists that steel still matters, that hands still matter, and that a century-old design can still be the most personal machine a shooter will ever own. Chapter 16. The Pistol That Outlived Its Century. The Future of the 1911. By any reasonable standard, the Colt 1911 should have disappeared decades ago. It is heavy, labor-intensive to build, must be carefully maintained, and it is rooted in manufacturing methods from the age of steam presses and hand-cut files. Yet here it stands, still commanding an almost patriotic loyalty in a world of polymer frames, striker triggers, and red dot optics. The future of the 1911 is not a question of whether it will survive, but how it will continue to change without losing itself. Modern versions of the MUSOC and JSOC pistol are selling like hotcakes, and manufacturers like TISA's and Mac Military Armament Corporation are putting out extremely accurate and reliable models at phenomenal prices. For civilians, the platform has now entered something like a golden age. Advances in CNC machining have made precision much more accessible, while modern metallurgy allows for lighter alloys, corrosion-resistant finishes, and components that last far longer than their wartime ancestors. Rails for lights, optics-ready slides, threaded barrels for suppressors, and adjustable grip modules are now commonplace. What once required a master gunsmith can now be delivered straight from the factory, yet the demand for hand-built pistols has never been higher. And with the advent of YouTube and its instructional capabilities, many 1911 fans and aficionados are becoming kitchen gunsmiths, enjoying tuning and customizing their own pistols at home. The rise of red dot optics on pistols might seem like a threat to tradition, but as usual, the chameleon-like 1911 has adapted. Slides are now milled to accept miniature reflex sights that sit low enough to co-witness with iron sights. Seasoned shooters, like Ken Hackathorn himself, who once swore they would never abandon traditional iron sights, now admit that a glowing red or green dot hovering over the target changes the entire experience of marksmanship. The 1911, with its excellent trigger and stable recoil impulse, is an ideal host for this technology. Even materials science has joined the conversation. Frames made from scandium alloys, Damascus steel, barrels coated with diamond-like carbon, and aerospace chrome silicon alloy springs engineered to cycle tens of thousands of rounds without fatigue, and even pistols made from actual meteorite all point toward a future where the 1911 becomes more durable, enjoyable, and collectible than ever before. None of these modern accoutrements are replacements for Browning's original ideas. They are refinements, allowing the pistol to live longer and work harder in harsher conditions. If you ask me, St. Browning would be proud. But the future of the 1911 is not driven solely by technology. It is driven by identity. Owners speak of their Brownings the way musicians speak of their instruments. A guitar player might buy many guitars, but there is always that one dream axe that feels like home. For many shooters, the 1911 is that home. Its weight, its balance, the sound of the slide going into battery, these are emotional experiences, not specifications. A century from now, historians may struggle to explain why this one design refused to fade. They will cite craftsmanship, ergonomics, and mechanical genius. But they may overlook the deeper truth. The 1911 survives because it allows us to participate in its story. You can tune it, rebuild it, personalize it, and hand it down to future generations. It carries fingerprints not just on its steel, but on its legacy. The earliest 1911s left Colt's factory wearing a deep, polished blue so dark it was almost liquid. This finish was beautiful but not forgiving. Bluing is not a coating, it is a controlled form of oxidation. It protects steel by turning the surface into a thin layer of magnetite, a type of rust, but it offers little resistance to salt, moisture, or neglect. Soldiers in 1917 learned quickly that sweat, rain, and mud could turn a mirror blue pistol into a freckled relic in days. Many of them wiped their pistols obsessively, using whatever oil they could find, even motor oil siphoned from trucks, to keep rust at bay. Modern finishes have taken protection even further. Cerakote, DLC, diamond-like carbon, nitride treatments, and various proprietary coatings now cloak 1911s in layers harder than tool steel and more corrosion-resistant than stainless. These finishes are not merely cosmetic, they are engineering solutions. A nitride slide shrugs off sweat and salt air. DLC coatings reduce friction, making cycling smoother while resisting wear. Cerakote allows owners to personalize their pistols in colors Browning could never have imagined, all while sealing the steel from the environment. The old armorers taught soldiers to field strip their pistols until they could do it blindfolded. Barrel out, recoil spring aside, slide separated from frame, every part laid out in order. Modern shooters use solvents and nylon or bronze brushes, but the principle remains unchanged. Clean until patches come out white. Pay special attention to the feed ramp and barrel throat, where even a trace of grime can interrupt feeding. Lubrication is both science and art. Too little oil and metal grinds on metal. Too much and the pistol becomes a magnet for dust and debris. The classic rule is simple: oil where things move, grease where they slide under pressure. A drop on the barrel hood, a thin line along the slide rails, a light touch on the disconnector and sear. Experienced shooters run their fingers along the rails after oiling, wiping away excess until only a sheen remains. The goal is not wetness but presence. Don't be surprised if your 1911 fails to chamber a round or stovepipes a cartridge because you are running it bone dry. Think of your Browning in a conjugal way: dry is just never going to work. Storage is the final act of stewardship. Steel hates humidity. A pistol left in a foam case in a damp closet will rust even under modern finishes. The best homes for 1911s are climate-controlled safes with desiccant packs or dehumidifiers, where temperature swings are gentle and moisture is banished. Some collectors wipe their pistols with a lightly oiled cloth before storage, not to soak the metal, but to leave behind an invisible shield. To maintain a 1911 is to participate in its survival. Every cleaning is a small promise to the past and the future, that this machine, conceived in another century, will not be allowed to fade quietly. It will be cleaned, lubricated, protected, and handed on, a piece of living history still warm with the touch of those who refuse to let it die. Notable variants of the Colt 1911, stories, owners, and legacy. For well over a century now, the 1911 pistol has evolved into countless variants, each reflecting the needs of soldiers, citizens, competitive shooters, collectors, and custom gunsmiths. Each version tells a story, and many are intertwined with the lives of famous owners, wars, competitions, and cinematic fame. M1911, 1911 to 1924. The original Browning M1911 and the variants leading up to it were designed by John Moses Browning and eventually adopted by the U.S. Army in March of 1911. It was revolutionary. It must be remembered that the 1911 was originally designed primarily for the U.S. cavalry, the Army on horseback. It was therefore intended to be shot one-handed while holding the reins of your horse with the weak hand. This is how and why we arrive at the grip and thumb safeties, as well as changes in the length and style of the hammer in future adaptations. Browning began working on his automatic pistol design in 1897. Over the preceding 14 years he presented various versions to the U.S. military, manufactured by Colt Firearms, for trial and acceptance. With each presentation and trial beginning in 1900, the pistols were tested, reported on, and modified as necessary. The first version submitted, the 1900 pistol, sported a 6 inches barrel which was considered muzzle-heavy and unwieldy. During the takedown of this version, the slide was removed from the rear of the frame rather than the front. It also had a dual-link barrel system as well as a small, flat, steel insert at the front of the slide called a key, the only thing preventing the slide from ejecting off the rear of the gun into the shooter's face. The 1900 was also equipped with a rear sight safety which when lowered blocked the hammer from striking the firing pin. This design proved awkward and was summarily discontinued. Then, in 1924, the 1911 was updated for military use and the United States received the M1911A1 variation. FYI, I am the lucky owner of a 1918 Remington UMC 1911 pre-war pistol, one of the most rare and collectible 1911s with less than 22,000 made of the 500,000 contracted by the U.S. military for World War I. I am also the proud father of a 1902 Browning pistol, sporting model, actually manufactured in the year 1902 and shipped from the Colt factory in Hartford, Connecticut, in a batch of 10 to the Browning Brothers gun shop in Ogden, Utah. Oh, I am also cherishing my 1903 Browning pocket hammerless pistol made in 1918. This was the quintessential concealed carry gun of its time and was therefore prized by such notorious criminals as John Dillinger, Al Capone, and Bonnie and Clyde. General Patton himself carried one of these little honeys, and legend has it John Dillinger was reaching for one when he was shot in front of the Biograph Theater in 1934. I wish I owned that one. Both 1776 Duck and the 1911 Syndicate have excellent videos on the 1903 pocket hammerless. You're welcome. The M1911A1, 1924, 1970s and 1924 the U.S. Army introduced the M1911A1 variant of Browning's pistol, with subtle improvements. A shorter trigger, an arched and serrated mainspring housing for a more comfortable and secure grip, larger and simplified sights, a longer grip safety spur, a narrower hammer and relief cuts or scallops, allowing the finger to slip easier into the trigger well. These small ergonomic changes made long-term handling easier and reduced accidental discharges. Generals, officers, and NCOs carried these pistols across multiple conflicts, including World War II, Korea, and early Vietnam. President Dwight D. Eisenhower reportedly owned an M1911A1, appreciating both its reliability and craftsmanship. The Colt Series 70 and AMP 80. When Colt introduced the Series 70 pistols in 1970, it felt like the company was trying to honor the soul of John Browning's 1911 while quietly updating it for a new generation of shooters. America was changing, target shooting was booming, and accuracy was becoming a selling point instead of just ruggedness. Colt's engineers didn't touch the heart of the pistol. The trigger system remained exactly as Browning designed it, but they introduced something new at the muzzle end: a spring steel collet bushing with flexible fingers that gently gripped the barrel into tighter alignment every time the slide went into battery. The Colt Series 70 was an outstanding, great-selling pistol. Then came the lawyers. From a safety standpoint, it worked beautifully. Drop a Series 80 pistol on its muzzle and the firing pin cannot reach the primer. From a traditionalist standpoint, it felt like sacrilege, and here's why. The extra parts altered the legendary 1911 crisp trigger pull, making it heavier and more complex to tune. Colt also abandoned the collet bushing with its grippy steel fingers in favor of a solid traditional bushing. The Series 80 pistols were more practical, more legally defensible, and safer for everyday carry, and Colt has continued producing them in various forms ever since. Generally speaking, they are not well liked. Tactical, custom, and modern variants. Wilson Combat, Les Baer, and Ed Brown also offered national match-style pistols. Using the Colt pistols as base guns, these master gunsmiths transformed the 1911 into competition marvels. Les Baer's pistols, famous for their tight slide-to-frame fit, often required hundreds of rounds to break in, but afterward achieved near-perfect accuracy. One shooter recounted scoring a perfect match at Camp Perry with a Baer pistol that had been painstakingly hand-fitted for over weeks. Ed Brown's pistols were hand-machined to exact tolerances, ensuring smooth cycling and predictable triggers. A famous story involves a collector whose Brown pistol performed flawlessly during a high-stakes competition after years of being meticulously maintained, illustrating the durability and reliability of Brown's engineering. Wilson Combat combined tactical applications with precision, innovation, and aesthetics. Bill Wilson's pistols were so good they even became popular among military and law enforcement units. An anecdote recalls a Navy SEAL officer who relied on his Wilson Combat National Match 1911 in multiple deployments, attributing the pistol's flawless reliability to countless successful missions. If you want to know what it's like to shoot a legendary competition pistol, and you happen to lead a charmed life, you may one day have the pleasure of handling or even owning a Wilson Combat LE Comp. Look into it. Kimber and Springfield Armory variants. Kimber brought modern refinements to an affordable, factory-produced 1911, including tighter tolerances, adjustable sights, and aesthetic finishes, making them popular with competitive shooters and law enforcement. Springfield Armory's renowned TRP, Tactical Response Pistol, variants incorporated match-grade barrels, reinforced frames, and modern coatings, creating pistols that honored the classic 1911 while meeting contemporary tactical requirements. This pistol is a favorite of Larry Vickers, former Delta Force Marine, firearms instructor, and gunsmith. Check out Larry's YouTube videos. You're welcome again. Jason Burton and Modern Gunsmith Editions. Jason Burton's is the Yoda of the modern-day 1911. Jason's hand-fitted pistols represent the newest generation of 1911 customization. His designs focus on subtle perfection, blending smooth lines, refined edges, and hand-fitted components. Collectors and shooters alike note that Burton pistols feel inevitable in the hand, a testament to his meticulous attention to mechanical and tactile harmony. Jason is a factory of one, single-handedly producing some of the most sought-after 1911s today. They are not cheap. You will wait a long time for one, but when you want the best, well, you know. Commemorative and collectible 1911s. Over the years, Colt and other makers have released commemorative pistols honoring milestones and historical events. Centennial editions, celebrating 100 years of the 1911, featuring engraved slides, polished finishes, and custom grips. WW1 and 2 commemoratives, replicating military-issued pistols, often with reproduction markings. Many of these are now family heirlooms or museum pieces. As a collector of 1911s, I am the owner of a spectacular Remington UMC replica pistol commissioned by Remington Firearms and built by Doug Turnbull Restoration. This pistol is nearly indistinguishable from my actual Remington UMC from 1918, except it is made of modern materials, and the great thing is, unlike the real thing, I can shoot this Turnbull all day long without worrying that the gun may disintegrate in my hand when I shoot it. I'm not about to destroy a legend that would not only remove a historical masterpiece from the planet, but it would put a severe dent in the value of my collection, and those two things would make me cry. Cry hard. What? Custom numbered editions. Made by master gunsmiths for collectors, these custom numbered pistols often fetch premium prices and showcase the pinnacle of 1911 craftsmanship. Famous owners of commemorative or custom pistols include law enforcement legends, competitive champions, and movie stars who have publicly praised the 1911 as their firearm of choice, further cementing its cultural significance. Wouldn't it be amazing if one of these 1,911 producers would focus on building 1911s that are featured in famous films? Come on, who's going to do it? You're welcome, yes again. Oh, before we move on, I thought you might like to know that recently I put together an all-chrome 1911 with gorgeous pearl grips based on the gun used by Samuel L. Jackson's character Jules in the 1994 Quentin Tarantino film, Pulp Fiction. I knew you'd like that. These experiences instilled in him an acute understanding of what it meant to survive under fire and how a firearm could be both a tool and an extension of a trained shooter's will. After the war, Cooper turned his focus to education and training, founding the American Pistol Institute in 1976, which later became the famed Gunsight Academy. At Gunsight, Cooper codified his modern technique of the pistol, a system designed to teach shooters how to engage targets effectively and safely under stress. His methodology emphasized 4 core principles: stance, grip, sight alignment, and trigger control. The Weaver stance, later adapted into the modern isosceles stance, was revolutionary at the time, teaching shooters to absorb recoil efficiently, maintain stability, and deliver rapid, accurate follow-up shots. Cooper's influence extended beyond technique. He also shaped firearm design and customization. Many features popularized in modern 1911s, extended beaver tails, tactical sights, match-grade triggers, and smooth, contoured grips, were either endorsed or inspired by Cooper's teachings. Gunsmiths and manufacturers recognized that shooters trained under Cooper's system demanded firearms capable of the highest performance, and the 1911 platform adapted accordingly. His advocacy for the .45 ACP cartridge also reaffirmed its place in both law enforcement and civilian circles, cementing the caliber's reputation for stopping power and reliability. Competitive shooters such as Bill Wilson and Armand Swenson applied Cooper's teachings to precision and practical shooting disciplines, refining trigger control, grip, and sight alignment to achieve remarkable accuracy and speed. In tactical circles, Cooper-trained officers emphasized the 1911's reliability in high-pressure situations, often customizing their pistols with Cooper-approved features such as extended beaver tails, match-grade triggers, and enhanced sights for optimal performance. Through his students, Jeff Cooper ensured that the 1911's legacy would evolve alongside modern tactics and technology. The pistol became more than a historical military sidearm. It became a precision instrument for defensive training, competitive shooting, and tactical operations. Each student carried forward Cooper's philosophy, a commitment to fundamentals, responsible firearm use, and a deep understanding of the synergy between shooter and weapon. By shaping the next generation of instructors, competitors, and tactical operators, Cooper ensured that the 1911 would remain both relevant and revered, its performance continuously enhanced by those who wielded it under his guidance. In essence, Jeff Cooper did not merely teach people to shoot. He redefined the relationship between shooter and firearm. His life and teachings elevated the 1911 from a century-old military sidearm into the benchmark for modern marksmanship and responsible firearm use. Through his training programs, writings, and influence on gunsmiths and manufacturers, Cooper ensured that the 1911 would not only endure as a historical icon but thrive as a living platform for skill, discipline, and mastery, a testament to the enduring synergy of man and machine. Purpose: protects the shooter's hand from hammer bite, allows a higher grip for better recoil management, and improves control during rapid fire. Application: today many custom 1911s feature undercut or extended beaver tails, reflecting Cooper's insistence on safe, consistent handling. Gunsmiths such as Les Baer Custom and Alchemy Custom Weaponry frequently implement this modification. 2. Match-grade triggers. Purpose: provides a clean, predictable single-action pull for precise shooting. Cooper emphasized that trigger control was paramount, and a crisp trigger reduced the chance of flinching or pulling shots off target. Application: skeletonized or polished triggers are now standard in high-end 1911s. Makers such as Wilson Combat, Novak King's Gunsmith, and Cabot Guns incorporate Cooper-approved trigger geometry for smooth, consistent breaks. 3. Tactical or adjustable sights. 4. Checkered or stippled grips. Purpose: secure, positive hand contact improves recoil management and consistent control. Cooper stressed that a firm, repeatable grip was essential for accurate follow-up shots. Purpose: allows rapid manipulation without disrupting grip, important in both defensive and competitive shooting. Application: extended, ambidextrous controls are now common in tactical and competition 1911s, reflecting Cooper's preference for intuitive, functional ergonomics. Purpose: polished feed ramps, fitted barrels, and tuned slides improve reliability and reduce friction during firing. Cooper emphasized that mechanical consistency allowed the shooter to rely on fundamentals under stress. 7. Optic-ready slides. Application: many Cooper-influenced 1911s today integrate optic-ready slides, often with low-profile mounts to maintain the classic silhouette while improving speed and accuracy. 8. Modern finishes. Narrative summary. By advocating these features, Jeff Cooper helped transform the 1911 from a historic military sidearm into a finely tuned instrument for modern shooters. His influence encouraged both manufacturers and gunsmiths to produce pistols optimized for accuracy, reliability, and user ergonomics, ensuring that the principles of the modern technique could be fully realized. The result is a generation of 1911s that honor Browning's original design while enhancing every aspect of its performance for the responsible, skilled shooter. Chapter 19. What is a TISA's 1911 and why do you need one? The TISA's 1911, from Turkish arsenal to American favorite. By the time the 1911 crossed its 100th birthday, the pistol had already lived more lives than any firearm had a right to claim. It had been a cavalry sidearm, a World War veteran, a movie star, a competition machine, a custom gunsmith's canvas, and a blue-collar working gun that rode in duty holsters and glove boxes across the country. Yet for many shooters in the 21st century, the 1911 had quietly slipped out of reach. Prices had climbed, custom shops were charging used car money, and even entry-level models were no longer truly entry-level. Then, almost without fanfare, a Turkish company called TISA's walked onto the American stage and reminded people what the 1911 had always been meant to be: a solid, reliable, well-built fighting pistol that the average working man could afford. Now, let me state unequivocally that I have no formal association with TSAs or any affiliates. I'm just a local musician and a gun guy. But good is good. That being said, as good, beautiful, and collectible as high-end guns can be, TSAs is not a boutique pistol maker chasing the American hobby market. Its full name, C&Rsenal A.S., hints at its origins in state-linked industrial arms manufacturing in Turkey. For decades, Turkish factories produced military and police weapons not for collectors, but for soldiers who carried them in harsh conditions. That background shaped TSAs long before the first American shooter ever heard the name. Turkey has quietly become one of the world's most capable arms manufacturing regions. Have you heard of Canik pistols? Skilled machinists, modern CNC infrastructure, and a long tradition of steelworking allow companies like TSAs to make service pistols to strict government standards at costs that Western companies could no longer match. When TSAs decided to produce a true Browning spec 1911 pistol that other companies claim to make but in actual fact do not, it was not chasing nostalgia, it was applying a military manufacturing mindset to a century-old design. TSA's pistols reached the United States largely through importers such as SDS Imports, and at first the reaction was cautious. American shooters had seen budget 1911s before and many were rough, poorly fit, or loaded with cost-cutting cast parts that wore out early. The expectation was simple: cheap guns, cheap results. However, TSA's pistols are forged carbon steel, not cast. Slides and frames are properly heat-treated. Dimensions were true to the original Browning blueprint. And while they lack the glitz and glam, the marketing gloss of the high-end, high-ticket brands, they run. And they run some more. They reliably feed ball ammunition all day long and they group better than their price tag has any right to promise. Word spread and continues to spread in gun shops, on internet forums, on YouTube and in quiet range conversations. This thing just works. TSAs builds pistols with modern CNC machining, but they do not chase gimmicks. Their core models, like the ASF, stay close to the GI or Series 70 pattern. Simple, well-built and tuned internals, no firing pin safety complexity, no experimental geometry. That restraint keeps tolerances consistent and reduces failure points. Is it any wonder they have taken off like a rocket? I myself currently have 6 TSAs pistols and they will not be my last. Next on my list is their JSOC and MUSOC Special Ops replicas. TSA's barrels and the barrel bushings are properly fitted, not loose drop-ins. Their feed ramps are cut and polished cleanly. Their extractors are shaped and tuned correctly. Their disconnectors are highly polished. Their triggers are crisp and clean without creep or over travel right out of the box. Actually, these pistols don't come in a crappy cardboard box like many high-end pistols do these days. They come in an excellent plastic case encased in humidity-defiant foam. These cases are great for travel to the range and will last you a lifetime. These are details that, perhaps invisible to the casual buyer, are exactly the telling details that determine whether a 1911 becomes a jam-prone safe queen or a pistol you trust on the range every weekend, in your holster every day and on your nightstand every night. Even the finish, while utilitarian, is applied evenly and holds up under use. These are not presentation pistols. They are working guns. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of TSAs is their quality control relative to cost. At a time when some established American brands are shipping pistols costing well over $1,000 that required a trip back to the factory before the first range session is over, TSAs is not so quietly delivering guns that work out of the box for around $300. Yes, you heard that right, around $300. This also makes TSAs a great platform to build on, to customize on, to trick out in every conceivable way. This quality and pricing is not continuing unnoticed. In that way, TSAs has revived the original spirit of the 1911, not as a luxury object but as an affordable and reliable tool. Now, for those who claim that they won't buy a non-American made pistol, please allow me to either inform or remind you that at the time of this recording, the most American firearm company in history, Colt Firearms, is now owned by the CZ Group, a company from the Czech Republic. Also, if that sticks in your craw, need I remind you that Glock is not an American company, and neither are many other makers of the firearms that we know and love. Some of the finest Winchester rifles ever made are currently being made in Japan by Morocco. So, there's that. Now, go get you a Tesis and hold it lovingly in your lap while you watch The Liberator on Netflix. You're welcome yet again. Before we go, let's clarify some 1911 terms. Ambidextrous safety. A safety lever present on both sides of the frame, allowing both right and left-handed shooters to engage or disengage the safety without changing their grip. Armand Swenson and modern gunsmiths often include this for tactical and competitive convenience. Bushingless barrel. A modern variant where the barrel fits directly into the slide without a removable bushing. This can simplify disassembly and improve consistency, but requires tight tolerances. Carry safety/thumb safety. A lever on the frame that locks the sear and prevents the hammer from falling. Engaging it prevents accidental discharge when the pistol is carried loaded. On an ambidextrous 1911, this is present on both sides. Connector. A small part that controls how the trigger engages the sear and hammer. Altering the connector can change trigger pull weight and feel, a common adjustment for custom or competition pistols. Decocker. A mechanism that safely lowers the hammer without firing a round. The 1911 does not normally have a decocker. It relies on the thumb safety for safe carry. Front sight/rear sight, the aiming system of the pistol. The front sight is a post at the muzzle, and the rear sight is a notch at the back of the slide. Modern 1911s may include fiber optic inserts, tritium for night use, or red dot optics on optic-ready slides. Lanyard loop. A small loop at the base of the frame or grip allowing the pistol to be secured with a cord, common in military use to prevent loss in combat. Parkerizing. A chemical phosphate coating that protects steel and allows oil to absorb into the finish, offering corrosion resistance. Standard on many World War II 1911s. Recoil spring. A spring that returns the slide to battery after firing. Spring strength affects cycling and recoil management. Many custom shooters experiment with different spring weights to tune performance. Safety. A catch or lever that prevents accidental discharge. The 1911 has both a grip safety and a thumb, manual, safety, forming a dual layer of protection. Slide. The moving upper part of the pistol that houses the barrel, firing pin, and extractor. It cycles with each shot, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round. Slide stop/slide release. A lever that locks the slide in the open position or releases it to chamber a round. Used during reloading and inspection. Striker. The component that strikes the primer to fire the round. The 1911 does not use a striker-fired system. It relies on a hammer. Trigger. The mechanism actuated by the shooter's finger to release the hammer. The 1911 trigger is celebrated for its short, clean single-action break. Trigger pull, the amount of force required to fire the gun. Custom 1911s often reduce this to 3 to 4 pounds for competition use while keeping safety intact. Undercut/beaver tail undercut. A modification to the frame's grip area that allows a higher hold and better control. This reduces perceived recoil and improves sight alignment. Wilson/Ed Brown/Les Bear/Custom Gunsmiths. Names synonymous with custom 1911 work, representing a spectrum from competition to tactical builds. They focus on hand fitting, trigger tuning, and perfection of mechanical interfaces. Zeroing, aligning sights or optics so that the point of aim matches the point of impact at a specific distance. Essential for accuracy, especially in competition or tactical use. I sincerely hope you have enjoyed this history of the 1911 pistol. If so, please like and subscribe to the channel and listen to this every single day of your life. I leave you with some recommended YouTube channels that have become favorites of mine and that I think you will enjoy also. C&Rsenal, Alchemy Custom Weaponry, Cabot Guns, 1776 Duck, Old Path Traveler, Wyoming Gun Project, Pierce Brothers, Wilson Combat, Spardella Arms, 1911 Syndicate, Mr. Colt 45 ACP, Historic Slumber, The Gunsmith Inc., Nelson Ford.